Let's take a look now at for loops and collections. We've seen an array before, and so I'm going to declare an array here that will store a number of trips. In other words, instead of running each vehicle 100 miles, we'll allow the user to enter multiple trips. Okay, so I'm going to say int trips, let's say all trips, equals new int. Now, the trick with an array, an old school array, is that we have to know in advance how many items we want in that collection. And I just realized that should be a capital T. How many trips do we want to go on? Now that's tricky. We don't want to be too low, because if we try to go on more trips than we have allocated space, we'll get what's called an array index out of bounds exception, and we want to avoid that. So what we'll typically do is give it a large number like 100, and then we will have a companion variable. Let me put some comments here. A collection of the trips we want to go on. Okay? And then a companion variable that tracks how many trips were actually in. Okay, sound went off in that previous recording, as you noticed, so I had to just do some magic to get it to come back, but wanted to keep that line there where it was. So for some reason, when Windows Explorer does something, occasionally it cuts off the mic on this recording. So, but anyway, no problem. Now, that is an array. It's a collection of primitives in this case. It's memory efficient, but the severe limitation is we do have to know in advance how many trips we want to go on, the maximum number of trips. We need something more flexible than that many times, and for that we will have an array list. An array list is similar to an array. It has a little bit more overhead, but the nice thing is it dynamically grows. So create an array list to hold our vehicles. So what I'll do now is I'll say array list, and then I need the less than symbol, and here I need to type what data type I want to store in this collection. It's going to be vehicle, and then give it a name, give the variable name, all vehicles equals new array list, and again, less than symbol, the data type we're storing in the array list, and then it's a constructor call, so we need an open and close paren. Now an array list is a class. It has to be imported. We have to tell it where to find it. So I click on the light bulb and say add import, and we're all set. One other thing, I'm going to want to make all these static because I'm referencing them from static methods, so I'm going to want to make all of these static. Probably could make them private as well. Might as well do that. Private, static, okay, boom, and boom. There we go, and now we'll save. Now, what I'm going to do is at the end of my prompt user, I am going to store this created vehicle in the array, let's say collection, in the collection of all vehicles. Okay, all vehicles dot add my vehicle. Oh, you know what? It actually suggested that for me and I typed over it. So I'm adding a vehicle to all vehicles. I'm adding a vehicle to the collection. And we're all set. Next thing is we need to prompt for a number of trips. So I'm going to make a new method that I'm going to call from main, and we'll call that prompt trips. Okay? Private void prompt trips. No parameters needed, open and close paren. And we'll call this method from main in just a second. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and prompt trips. So this is user input, so I'm going to use a do while loop. I start with a do, close it with a while more trips equals yes, in quotes. Now you may wonder, what's more trips? Well, we haven't declared it yet. String more trips, okay, whoops, okay, more trips equals J option pane. Type yes if you wish to enter more trips. Okay, there we go. So let me put some comments here. Okay, declare our loop control variable. Okay. Ask if the user wishes to enter more trips. Okay, and now we have the guts of the method left. We've done all the loop control. Probably should add some comments here as well. Prompt the user for a number of trips to run the vehicles. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to ask the user for a distance. How far do you want the vehicle to go? Well, as luck would have it, we already have this validate int method. Why don't we just use that? So I'll say int distance equals validate int. Okay, trip can't be less than 0. Probably 5,000 miles is a reasonable maximum. And then say, how far do you want to go on this journey? Okay, and terminate with a semicolon. Okay, now we want to store that in our collection that we declared above called all trips. But the trick is, if we store data in an array, we have to give it an index or an element where we want it to store. So instead of using a local variable, what I can do is just say all trips and then square brackets. But within that square bracket, I need a number. And that number is where in that collection I wish to store these data. I've hard-coded it to 0 right now, which is not realistic because then it would always store the data in the 0 position, which would mean it would overwrite what's there before, and that's not what we want. We need something dynamic. We need something so that each time this loop executes, the number is 1 greater. Well, that might just work out well because remember we have this loop, we have this trip counter, which we wanted to use anyway to count the number of trips that were entered. So I'm going to say increment the trip counter plus plus, remember that guy, plus plus. And now instead of all trips 0, I'll put all trips trip counter. And a comment that says prompt the user for the distance traveled in this trip. Okay, now, wow, that was a lot of information, so let's stop and think about it. We're prompting the user here using our pre-existing validate int. We're storing that in the array all trips. We declared trip counter to keep track of the number of trips that were entered. Each time a trip is entered, we increase trip counter by 1. Okay, now, because of that, the first time we loop, this will be a 0. The second time, it'll be a 1. The third time, a 2. The fourth time, a 3, and so on and so forth. Which means that each time we loop, we're advancing to the next cubbyhole, or the next index location within our array. So this will work out great. This will be just fine. Each time we loop, we're going to point to the next area in the array, and we're going to store the variable there so we won't be overwriting anything. So that looks pretty good. I'll save. And now I'm going to go to my main method. After prompt user, I'll invoke prompt trips. Okay. What doesn't it like about that? Oh, I need to make it static. Okay, private static void prompt trips. There we go. Okay. Okay. Prompt for the number of trips to run. Okay, looks great. Now I'm going to save, and I'm just going to make sure everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'm going to insert only one car, and then I'm going to try several trips. Okay, gallons of gas 10, miles per gallon 10, odometer 10,000, no more. Okay, how far do you want to go on this journey? 100. Type yes if you wish to enter more trips. Uh-oh. Oh, something went wrong. Oh, it should be equals. Okay, well, equals ignore case. That way I can enter yes in any case. Uppercase, mixed case, lowercase, doesn't matter. All right, fix that. Try again. Okay, 10, 10, 10,000 or 1,000. No more vehicles. 100 miles. Yes, I want to enter more. Negative 10 miles. Out of range. 25. Yes, I want to enter more. 400 miles or 4,000 miles. Yes, I want to enter more. 80 miles. Yes, I want to enter more. I can keep doing this as much as I want until I choose no, and then it finishes. So I entered a series of numbers there. Each number was held in a different location in that array. So now what do we have? We have a collection of cars, and we have a collection of trips. Now let's take each car and have each car run each of those trips. So if I have 3 cars, 4 trips, it's going to be a total of 12, because each of the 3 cars will do the 4 trips. Okay, we're almost there. Remember this guy more vehicle that we had, or move vehicle that we had before? Okay, well, here we go. This is where we can run each car for the specified number of trips. What I'm going to do is change this just slightly. I no longer need the parameter variable. We'll take that out. I'm going to get a couple red lines there, but that's okay. I'm going to make it move vehicles because we have multiple vehicles. Now what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the for loop, but we're going to see it 2 different ways. First of all, one of my absolute favorite things about NetBeans, there's a loop called foreach that's specifically tuned to iterate over collections like an array list. In NetBeans, all I have to do is type F-O-R-E and then hit tab, and it puts in the for loop. Now, in this case, it thinks I want to iterate over trips. Not just yet. I actually want to iterate over vehicles. So I'm going to need to change that just a little bit. So tab, all vehicles. There we go, and it fixed it. Okay. So in what this is going to do, this is a very simplified syntax. So simple, it's almost tricky. We're going to iterate over the collection named all vehicles. By iterate, I mean if there are 5 vehicles, we're going to touch each one of them, and each one of them will have one go in this loop, as my British friends would say. Or each one of them will execute once in this loop. So if there are 5 vehicles, we're going to execute this loop 5 times. I'm already using the variable name myVehicle, so I'll go ahead and just switch this to myVehicle. And there we go, that looks good. Now I'm going to take this information I have before, and I'm going to paste that within the loop. A little bit of Alt-Shift-F to auto-format. There we go, looking good. So at this point, if I have 3 vehicles, this blue block is going to run for vehicle 1, vehicle 2, and vehicle 3. This is what's called a for each loop. It takes a collection on the right side of a colon. And what it's going to do is it's going to iterate once for each item in that collection. Each time it iterates, it's going to take one object from that collection in order, starting from the first, ending with the last, and it's going to store it into this local variable. And if I click on that local variable, we'll see that we're referencing that local variable, it's what's in yellow, within this loop. So again, a for each loop is specially tuned to work with collections. We put the collection variable on the right of a colon, and on the left of the colon we declare a single variable that's going to hold each of the items in this collection, okay? But it's only going to hold it for the duration of one loop. That's kind of hard to explain. So all vehicles, if we have 3 vehicles in there, the very first time we iterate, it takes the first vehicle, stores it here, and then all of these operations are performed on the first vehicle. Second time it iterates, it takes the second vehicle from here, stores it in here, and then runs this. Third time, take the third vehicle and run all the operations on the third vehicle. That's what a for loop is for. Very nice. For loop is relatively new in Java, or for each is relatively new, this syntax. We used to have to do it in old school style, and I'm going to show you that now as well. Because notice we're hard coding this to run 100 times. Sorry, 1 second please. Sorry about that. So what I'm going to do here is I need to do a loop within a loop. I need to run each car each trip. Okay? So I'm going to do an old school for loop for int I equals 0, semicolon, I less than all, or trip counter, I plus plus. And then open curly and close curly, Alt-Shift-F to reformat. Now instead of my vehicle go 100, I'm going to call my vehicle go all trips I. Okay, this is an old school for loop, but you see what we're doing? In the outer loop, we're looping over all vehicles. In the inner loop, we're looping over all trips. And then right here on line 143, we're running the vehicle for this loop iteration, the distance specified in this trip. Okay, so I'm going to save, and I am going to go ahead and just run through this once, and then we'll take a look in the debugger in just a moment. So, okay, I'll run. I'm going to enter 2 vehicles and maybe 3 trips. How many gallons of gas? 15. How many miles per gallon? 20. How many miles on the odometer? 20,000. Type yes to enter another. How many gallons of gas? 10. How many miles per gallon? 10. How many miles on the odometer? 10,000. No more to enter. How far do you want to go on the first journey? 100 miles. Type yes to enter another. How far on the second? 200 miles. Type yes for another. How far on the third? 50. No more to enter. Now think about that. 2 vehicles, 3 trips. How many times is line 143 going to run? Well, it's multiplication. The outer loop runs 3 times. The outer loop runs twice, once for each vehicle. The inner loop runs 3 times, once for each trip. So we have to multiply the 2 by the 3. And what we'll see is, oh, did I hit the wrong button there? Shoot, 1 second. Output. I think I hit the wrong button. Either that or I'm not seeing my output, because I see it's off the screen here, but what I was expecting was to see this output. So we'll take a look at that in just one moment. Okay, in that last run, I didn't get the output I expected, and I found the issue. It's, of course, a silly one. I made a method called more vehicles, and I never invoked it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invoke the method more vehicles, and we'll say, oh, I bet that needs to be static, doesn't it? So we'll make it, no, that's good. Oh, move vehicles with a V. Move vehicles, okay, so we will say move each of the vehicles each of the trips. In other words, each vehicle will move once per trip. Now I'm going to save this, and let's take a look at it in the debugger. I right-click and choose Debug. And again, if nothing else, the debugger is a great learning tool. Okay, we're at the beginning of prompt user, which is where I set my breakpoint. Okay, and now we are going to prompt for gallons of gas. We'll create 2 vehicles and probably 3 trips. How many gallons of gas in this? Let's do 15 gallons of gas. Okay, F8. We have our validate int method. How many miles per gallon? We'll say 15. F8, F8. What's the odometer reading? 15,000. F8, F8. Type yes to enter a new vehicle, which we will. So we get to the test on the loop, and it's going to start us again at the top. Create a new vehicle object. How many gallons of gas? 20. Okay, F8, F8. Oh, daggone it, sorry. Okay, I hit F7 by mistake. Okay, how many miles per gallon? We'll say 20. F8, F8. How many miles on the odometer? Let's go with 20,000. F8. Would you like to add another? We'll say no. Now, this is where the debugger is really handy. Let me scroll up here and let's take a look at all vehicles. Right now you'll see there's one item there. And if I expand it, we'll see it's the first vehicle that I created with the 15s. Now, take a look at the line I'm on now. I just created the vehicle with the 20s. And when I choose F8 here, it's going to add that vehicle with the 20s to the all vehicles collection. So let's give it a try. F8. And notice now there's a 0 element, the one with the 15s, and there's a 1 element, and that 1 element has the second vehicle I created with the 20s. So at this point, we have two different vehicles in the all vehicles collection. Okay, so I choose F8. And now it's going to go back to where prompt user was invoked, which is the main method. And now we're going to prompt for trips. And once again, the debugger and the variables view is going to be very valuable here. Let's press F7. Okay. We start in this do while loop, and remember the test doesn't happen until the end. And what we're going to do is we're going to call our validate int method, which remember, we give it a low range, a high range, and then some prompt text, and then it will continue to ask the user for data until it gets something that falls within that range, and then it's going to return that valid data. Now, let's take a look right now at this thing called all trips, and what we see is we have 100 different indexes here, 100 different cubby holes, all of them initialized to 0. We're about to change that. Let's also take a look at trip counter. Trip counter is currently 0. Okay, so when I say all trips trip counter, I'm saying go to this collection all trips, go to the cubby hole with this value, which is the 0 place. Okay? Currently, that's holding the number 0. And then store into that whatever the result is of this method here. Okay? So let's try it out. I choose F8. Let's say we want to go 100 miles. And OK. Now take a look. See how the 0 element now has 100? And right here we're about to increment trip counter, which will change it from a 0 to a 1. F8. Ask for more trips. Yes, we'll do more trips. F8. Now, what's the value of trip counter? It's 1. Take a look at all trips. Notice that we already have something in the 0 cubby hole. Now we're putting something into the 1 cubby hole. So I F8. How far do you want to go on this journey? We'll say 200. F8. Now we have trip counter as 2 trips, and notice that we're occupying the first and second cubby hole. Okay, and trip counter is 2. F8. Yes, let's do it again. F8. Okay. How far do you want to go on this journey? We'll say 50. Trip counter we increment. And again, if I look at all trips, we'll see in order 100 in the 0 element, 200 in the 1 element, 50 in the 2 element. And that's all we're going to use, but that's okay because our trip counter says we have 3 stored trips. Trip counter is this guy right here. So we're all set. I don't want any more trips. F8, F8. This is going to take us back to the main method. And in the main method, we're going to call the move vehicles method. I keep saying that. That's going to iterate over the vehicles. While it's doing that, it's also going to iterate over the trips. And it's going to move each vehicle once for each trip. So let's choose F7. Okay, our outer loop is looping over the collection of vehicles. And we know that we have 2 items in the collection of vehicles, our 15s car and our 20s car. So first we'll grab the 15s car. I choose F8. Now within this loop for the 15s car, we're looping over the number of trips. So we're going to do this inner loop 3 times. F8, do some output. Okay, now we're telling it to move all trips I. I is currently 0. All trips at the 0 position has a value of 100. So after we move this, we should see that the vehicle, instead of having 15,000 on the odometer, will have 15,100. F8. Okay, and let me click there again. And 15,100, there we go. And the gallons of gas is also decreased from 15 to 9. Okay, F8, F8. Now we're on the second journey. The second journey, I believe we set up for 200. There we go. Notice that the I is no longer 0, it's now 1, which means it's going to grab this second journey. So we F8, F8. Now when I move for the second journey, the vehicle 0 odometer will go from 15,100 to 15,200. F8, F8, F8. And there we go. 15,300. And we're negative gallons of gas. We probably should watch for that. Okay, now the third and final trip, which is the index number 2 of all trips, which is 50 miles, as I recall. There we go, 50 miles. Okay, we're going to move it 50 miles, F8. Let's look at our vehicle, and we see that the odometer is now 15,350. And we F8, F8. Now the inner loop is complete. At this point, we're going to do the outer loop again. The outer loop this time we'll use on the second vehicle, which is the vehicle with the 20s. Okay, there we go. So we're going to run all 3 trips on the vehicle with the 20s. Okay, F8. Okay, I'll go through this one a little bit faster. We run the 100 miles, 200 miles, and 50 miles. And we see that the odometer is 20,350 now, where it used to just be 20,000. At this point, we're all set. So if we have a nested loop, we have to take the number of iterations of the inner loop and multiply that by the number of iterations of the outer loop. And that's how many times these lines are going to run. So it's multiplication, and it's very important to keep that in mind, because if we have too many nested loops going over too much data, it can be rather inefficient. I'll go ahead and finish this one off, and if we look at output, we will see all the different moves for our 15s vehicle moving at 100 miles, 200 miles, 50 miles. Then our 20s vehicle, 100 miles, 200 miles, and 50 miles. And there we go. So that's all I have to say about loops. This will be on the quiz 6 suggestions. And so if we had some things to think about the different parts of a loop, think about the loop control variable, think about when you would use a for loop versus a do while versus a while, think of the syntax of a for loop. So think about, maybe you could do a question where we take the for loop and maybe we leave some of this blank. So let you know, maybe I didn't explain this one very well. In a for loop, we have a declaration part, and then we have a test, and then we have an increment. The declaration happens as soon as we enter the loop. The test, even though it's up at the top, actually that will happen at the beginning of each loop. And then the increment happens at the end of the loop. So again, initialize a variable, that happens when we enter the loop. Test, that happens right before we loop, and we will only loop if that results to true. And then increment part. So some different loops we have to look at. We also discussed the differences between an array and an array list, how an array list will dynamically grow, but an array will not. We talked about a companion variable that tells us how many things are in an array. And we said an array index out of bounds exception will occur if you have, say, an array of 100 elements and you try to get to element number 101. So lots of things we can talk about on loops. And so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and stop and upload this video. Next video, I'm going to ask you for things that you found confusing that you'd like me to go over again. So I'll post a survey soon, and we'll wrap that one up for our last week. Thank you.